Group B. An oft-romanticised era of rallying and GT racing, just about everyone has their favourite car from the period. Whether it's the successful 205 T16, the mad Metro 6R4, or even something really odd like a BX4TC, the chances are that it raced at least once. But what about the cars that never got to race? Well, that's the topic of this Studio 2 double feature, the forgotten, unhomologated cars of Group B. Part 1 will cover front-engine cars, with Part 2 covering mid-engined ones. Contrary to popular opinion, Group B wasn't just about rallying. It was also planned to be a circuit racing class between Group A's road-going machinery and Group C's prototypes. Such makes as Lamborghini and Jaguar were even planning to compete. Unfortunately, this never really happened in any capacity, due to a multitude of reasons, the final one being Group B's ban in 1986. This ban, despite being targeted at the rally class, effectively cancelled the circuit racing plans as well. I will not be focusing on those circuit cars however, because there are plenty of unraced rally machinery to fill up 2 episodes on their own. This setup is classic pre-Group B rally stuff, from the Abarth 131 in Opel Ascona to the Datsun 240Z in the various RS badged Escorts. Speaking of Ford's unlikely rally icon, cars wearing the Escort name have competed in every major rally class over the years. Well, almost every class. While Escorts raced in Group 4, Group A, the WRC, F2 kit cars and many others, there was never a true Group B version. This was not the original plan however, as the then new Escort Mark III was at the centre of Ford's Group B hopes. The Mark III was not, at first glance, the sort of car that would win rallies. See, the successful Escorts 1 and 2 were rear-wheel drive, and could thus handle plenty of power, the late Mark IIs putting about 250 horsepower through their back wheels. The Mark III though, that was front-wheel drive, and putting 250 horsepower in a front-wheel drive car in the early 80s was tantamount to a death sentence. Something had to change, and the more relaxed regulations of Group B threw a lifeline to Ford's rally sport team. Quite simply, they would build a car that looked like a Mark III, but actually used the same rear-wheel drive recipe underneath as the old Mark IIs. It was an early example of what people would call the silhouette rally car, often thought to be the first of its kind. The same basic engine as the Group 4 Escort was planned to be used, albeit with one major difference: turbocharging. In order to fit into the sub-2500cc category of Group B, Cosworth's iconic 4-cylinder BDA would have to be downsized to 1778cc to allow for the 1.4 times multiplier given to turbocharged motors. The end capacity given by the FIA was 2489cc, just squeezing under the limit. Now, you may be thinking, but that would make it a 1.8, so why did they call it the RS 1700 and not the RS 1800? The reason for this was simple: to avoid confusion with the outgoing rally car, which was already called the RS 1800. Going back to the Group B project codenamed Columbia, the newly turbocharged engine was found to be capable of producing at least 350 horsepower, deemed more than sufficient by the engineers. With the engine now approved, it was given a new name, BDT, to differentiate it from the old naturally aspirated unit. That wasn't the only competition-proven engine trialled in Project Columbia, however, as Hart Racing naturally aspirated 2.3 was also considered. This produced less power than the BDT, but was trialled anyway in case of unforeseen problems with the turbocharged unit. The first test of Ford Rally Sport's creation came at the 1982 Tour de Corse, where Finnish drivers Ari Vatanen and Pentti Arikkala ran the Hart and BDT prototypes respectively. Vatanen's thoughts on the Hart car afterwards were poor, perhaps impacted by his major crash during the test, but the BDT's results were anything but. The car ran stages 1 to 2 seconds quicker than the rally's previous winner, an Abarth 131, results that Ford found acceptable to continue development. This development would also include a 4-wheel drive version for 1984, as Audi's Quattro soundly beat the Escort's times during the Tour de Corse test. This would not happen, however, as when Stuart Turner was appointed head of Ford's European motorsports operation, he cancelled the programme almost immediately. This was February 1983, and he could already see the balance of power shifting towards mid-engined and 4-wheel drive cars. As a result, he told the engineers to begin work on a car that would incorporate both these aspects, one that didn't need to look like any of Ford's road cars. This would end up being the BDT-equipped RS200, which raced in 1986 to little success. By the point of cancellation, however, 18 prototypes of the RS1700T had already been built. The majority of these were rebranded as RST or Rally Sport Turbo and were exported to South Africa, a nation that did not require any form of homologation for rally entries. One of these RSTs won the 1985 Nissan International Rally, but that was the sole win for the car, Quattros usually dominating the field. Peugeot also experimented with a front-engined rear-wheel drive saloon, before settling on something mid-engined and four-wheel drive. In their case, it was this, the 305 V6 Rally. The similarities didn't end there, as just like the RS1700T, the 305 V6 was a rear-wheel drive version of a front-wheel drive car. The story is largely the same too, with the program being cancelled in favour of developing the hugely successful 205 T16 in around 1981 or 82. It was a shame really, as the prototype 305 V6s still looked brilliant. Their competitiveness would have been another matter though, as they used a 250 horsepower version of the PRV V6. This engine was perhaps most famously used in the DeLorean DMC-12, albeit with a much different setup, but despite sports car connections it was simply down on power compared with most of the competition. Speaking of being uncompetitive, that was the reason why Mercedes' planned Group B version of the 190e Cosworth didn't even reach the prototype stage. It was to be rear-wheel drive, and by the time it was greenlit the tide had already turned towards four-wheel drive. Mercedes' engineers knew that developing an already dated concept would be pointless, and the project was scrapped in 1983. Very little is known about the project, so it is likely that nothing concrete was set out in the short development period. The final car in this category is a strange one, the Opel Kadett D400. On initial inspection, it appears to be a regular Kadett with a wide-body kit, but in fact, underneath, it isn't a Kadett at all. Instead, it used the mechanicals of the rear-wheel drive Opel Manta 400 in a smaller, lighter body, perfect for rallying. The engine was positioned further back in the Kadett too, meaning better weight distribution than the big coupe. It was looking extremely promising, with testing in South Africa displaying a decent turn of speed, but by then the story I've repeated several times played out for the Opel team as well. Four-wheel drive was the feature, and not even a 220 horsepower rear-wheel drive Opel Kadett could change that. While the Kadett D400 was being developed, a side project was greenlit by the director of Opel Motorsport, Henry Fall, as a backup in case rear-wheel drive couldn't cut it. This was a Manta 400 fitted with a four-wheel drive system from FF Developments. FFD would later go on to make the four-wheel drive system for the 205 T16, RS200, Delta S4 and Metro 6R4, so clearly FFD were a wise choice by Fall. The Manta prototype would be built in just 6 months, using a whole host of parts from FFD's prior works, even front suspension parts from a Triumph. It worked though, and the four-wheel drive Manta smashed the benchmark on wet and loose surfaces set by the rear-wheel drive model. The car was shown publicly at the 1983 Rally of Sweden, but did not set any stage times. The reaction was positive, although behind the scenes, trouble was brewing. Opel was concerned that the car would not be competitive, even with four-wheel drive, due to the lack of power compared with rivals. It was still fitted with the regular Manta's naturally aspirated engine, producing around 240 horsepower. A turbocharged variant was planned for 1984, but the rising costs of development and the by now very dated looking road car meant that the project was cancelled soon after. The single prototype is now in private hands, and has since been converted back to rear-wheel drive. Opel's final roll of the Group B dice was the Kadett E4S, similar in spirit to the aforementioned Kadett D400. But while the D400 was a GTE fitted with Manta internals, the E4S was a wholly bespoke beast. The Kadett link was in styling only, as this was to be a four-wheel drive Kevlar-bodied semi-space frame bid for the Group B title. It may be surprising then that for such a bespoke creation, it wasn't mid-engined. This was a conscious decision, made so that it would be easier, less demanding and more predictable to drive, as Opel pictured it being a popular privateer entry into the class. Another surprising aspect of the E4S was the four-wheel drive system. You'd have expected Opel to return to FFD after the Manta collaboration, but they didn't. The system was instead developed by X-Track, a popular drivetrain specialist for rally and rallycross cars. The end result was a car that weighed less than a tonne, with an 850 kilo variant to arrive later on. While this was admirably light, the Opel team had another issue: power. The old Manta engine was nowhere near being competitive, struggling to reach 300 horsepower in competition form. The team's first approach was supercharging, hence the E4S name, Kadett E, four-wheel drive, supercharged. This only resulted in 325 horsepower, still not enough for the car to be competitive. So then they turned to turbocharging, which could get upwards of 400 horsepower out of the unit, but with severe reliability issues in the process. With a deadline looming, the engineers had to prove the potential of the car to Opel higher-ups in order to continue development. A new engine had to be found, and they were forced to look outside of the General Motors sphere to Ford tuner Zaxpeed. They supplied a turbocharged 1.8 litre engine in secret, which put out a very respectable 500 horsepower. It showed off the car's potential very well, right up until the moment the ruse was found out, much to Opel's embarrassment. Since the supercharged version was the only reliable option not fitted with Ford components, a second supercharged prototype was produced for testing. This was badged as the Vauxhall Astra 4x4 for testing of the 1986 British Rally Championship, under prototype rules of course. Two of the Opel badge cars were also tested in the 1986 Paris-Dakar, to poor results. However, 1986 wasn't all bad for the E4S. Group B was cancelled that year, with Group S planned to replace it. The 300 horsepower limit of the latter meant that the power issue with the car wouldn't be an issue, apart from one caveat: the engine's capacity was too high for forced induction to be allowed. Not that it mattered of course, because Group S was cancelled later that year. The Opel team may have the most tragic story of any Group B team, as it seemed like nothing ever went right for them, from expensive development and poor engines, to Ford-engined embarrassment and unlucky regulations. As an aside, one of the supercharged models was later bought by a private buyer, who used it to race in the British Rallycross Championship. The Manta motor was fitted with a BMW Formula 1 turbocharger and ending up producing around 650 horsepower. Another car that was curtailed by the sudden end of Group B was the Mitsubishi Starion, a car already known to anyone who played an old Gran Turismo game. Within the first year of Group B competition, Mitsubishi saw their fairly new Lancer 2000 Turbo get soundly beaten by the other factory teams, especially Audi. It was a shame, as in its previous Group 4 guys, the Lancer was very fast, if a little unreliable. The Starion was chosen to be the base of Mitsubishi's next rally car because at that point it was still fairly new. However, it was rear-wheel drive as standard, and the company knew that it wouldn't be able to cut it without all four wheels being powered. As with most manufacturers in Group B, the development work for the four-wheel drive system was handed off to a third party. In this case though, the external company was much closer to home than usual. Due to their long-standing relationship with Mitsubishi, Rally Art was chosen for development of the system, and of the car as a whole. On the team was Alan Wilkinson, who had previously been a part of the Audi Quattro's development team, so the Starion was in good hands. The main part of the four-wheel drive system came from Mitsubishi's off-roader, the Pajero, also known as the Shogun or the Montero, and was thus cheaper than many other companies' efforts. Another cheap solution was found in the engine bay, Mitsubishi electing to reuse the engine from the aforementioned Lancer 2000 Turbo. However, this was just as a temporary solution for development work, the final product being planned to use the 4G63 motor. This engine would later become famous within rallying for its use in the Galant VR4 and Lancer Evo models. It would be bored out to 2.1 litres for the Starion, meaning that with the WRC's 1.4 times multiplier, it would slot in nicely under the 3000cc class limit. Power was around 350 horsepower. Not amazing for the class, but not bad by any means, especially when compared with Opel's engine woes that I detailed earlier on. The reason why the car looks almost unrecognisable as a Starion is because of the nose. The pop-up headlights were removed in favour of round fixed units due to their extra reliability and ease of replacement. Due to the change, the front end could be shortened by around 15 cm, aiding weight distribution and reducing the total weight. Speaking of the weight, the car used fiberglass, plastic, carbon fibre and Kevlar components throughout, weighing only around 1,050 kilos in rally trim. Initial tests in 1984 showed that the Starion was a seriously quick car, but by that point the shift towards mid-engine machines was evident. Nevertheless, Mitsubishi ploughed onwards, towards a planned homologation in late 1986. It was also hoped that the car could be sold to privateers as an off-the-shelf competitive rally car, as national events usually did not feature the mid-engine cars that could beat the Starion. But my mention of a late 1986 homologation date has surely tipped you off to the rest of this story. Yes, the cancellation of Group B meant that the Starion simply wasn't homologated in time. Group S and Group A homologation variants were then considered, but neither went ahead. The former because of its cancellation, the latter because by this point the Starion was 5 years old, and Mitsubishi wasn't sure for how long it would keep on selling. They instead chose the Galant VR4 as their Group A rally machine, but much of the technology used for the Starion was carried over, so it was not all in vain. Part 2 of this double feature includes mid-engine machinery from a wide variety of makes, from Daihatsu and Moscovich to Alfa Romeo and Talbot. One rear-engined car also makes an appearance, but it's probably not the one you're thinking of. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss part 2.